welcome to today's Virtual Digital Economy seminar. It's a pleasure to welcome you again all today for yet another exciting virtual talk. Our moderator today will be Imke Reimers at Northeastern University. She will introduce today's guest in a second. First, again, some legal fine print. So if you have any clarifying questions throughout the talk, please send these to everyone in the chat window, and Imke will interrupt the speaker at a convenient time and allow you to ask a question directly, or if you prefer, ask it for you. She will also collect questions for the Q&A after the talk in this way, so don't hesitate to send questions via the chat at any point in time. Today's session will be recorded, so if you do ask a question yourself, you will appear in the recording on YouTube. All right, very happy to hand over to Imke.
Yeah, all right, thank you, Johannes, and thanks, Steve, for coming as well. I've got the honor to introduce Steve Tadelis to this week's seminar. Steve is the Sarin Chair in Strategy and Leadership at UC Berkeley, and what kind of makes him special as an academic is that he's also spent a lot of time outside of academia with eBay and with Amazon, and you can kind of tell that his research kind of moving into this e-commerce direction. I always really kind of liked his work, and especially because it combines these theoretical foundations with interesting empirical work, and I think this paper fits in there very well as well. So I look forward to hearing his talk on communication and bargaining breakdown.
Thank you very much, Imke. Pleasure to be with you all from rainy Berkeley, where it's been raining the last couple of days, a bit early in the year. This is joint work with my good friend and colleague, Matt Backus, and Tom Blake, who's now at Amazon and was at eBay when we started this project, and Jett, who actually was no longer at Columbia. She's a graduate student at MIT, and I expect in 5 years that you will hear about her. So without further ado, Matt and Tom and I, and with this project with Jett, we've been exploring a bunch of things related to bargaining with some pretty cool data that I'll describe. And I think that Vince Crawford in 1982, this is quite a while ago, said something that I believe is quite true, that bargaining is such a pervasive use. It's so much used across so many different parts of the economy that if we would find ways to better understand how to make bargaining more efficient, this might be even bigger, as he wrote, than understanding of macroeconomic policy. As a microeconomist, I have to admit I've never understood macroeconomic policy. But with that, how do we make bargaining more efficient? How could we design bargaining protocols? Right? We have on one extreme, shuttle diplomacy, where the parties don't talk to each other, and you have some kind of messenger between them. Caucus negotiations, where everybody's talking to everyone. There are mediation, arbitration services. And then in today's day and age, when a lot of interactions are happening online, not surprisingly, bargaining is also happening online. Saatchi art sales allows you to bargain with artists. Taobao has a lot of bargaining on it. And on eBay, back when we got the data for this, about 10% of transaction volumes were negotiated through their best offer bargaining platform that I'll describe in a little more detail. This is something that's been going on for a long time and is being adopted in the e-commerce arena. Now, I appreciate and I'm grateful for Imke's kind words about mixing theory and empirics. In this paper, we don't have a lot of theory to build on. And as you'll see, it's the empirical results, I think, are going to still leave us somewhat thirsty for what's the right theory to embed here. I see there's a question that Larry asked, what does more efficient mean in this context? I'm kind of with half an eye monitoring the chat. Think of more efficient, Larry, as when there are gains from trade, we're more likely to indeed trade. So basically think, back to Myerson Satterthwaite, that we could never have first best efficiency if we have incomplete information. And then the question is, whether different protocols or different ways of allowing people to bargain may increase the likelihood of when the buyer's willingness to pay is greater than the seller's willingness to sell, that you'll indeed get some sales that otherwise, with a worse protocol, quote unquote, you might not get. So in tacit bargaining theory, there's really no role for communication. Think Rubinstein or something like that as well. In cheap talk models of communication, there's a nice paper by Wouter de Seen where more communication could actually be bad for outcomes applied to a kind of org econ framework. If you think about a mechanism design approach, there's a very nice paper by Farrell and Gibbons. Communication is irrelevant. And I'm not suggesting there are out there, but once we kind of open the door to a behavioral approach, then maybe communication can be good. I don't have any papers to refer to, but maybe when we allow communication, it changes preferences, it creates some camaraderie. We're pretty agnostic about that. So that's on the theory side. We kind of feel, we don't have much to hang our hats on. And in terms of data, well, there are some experiments that have been done where communication has been part of the experiment in different ways, not necessarily, not at all about bargaining in particular. So, here are just a few papers where communication could, there could be excessive communication or people don't like lying. So, maybe communication is a way to extract real information, even though it's cheap talk. And in repeated pricing games, prisoners' dilemmas, then there's a nice paper by Cooper and Kayuve-Kun that communication helps people coordinate on equilibria. So there is some suggestive experiments, or maybe more than suggestive, that communication does change outcomes, even when it is apparently cheap. So what we're going to do what we're doing in this paper is we believe we're offering the first empirical work from the field on the way that communication facilitates bargaining. Now, like I said, we're going to have as many open questions as the ones we're trying to answer, if not more. But I think it's, we're kind of moving the needle a bit, and you'll judge to see whether that seems to be the case. So the data is coming from eBay's best offer platform, which I'll describe in a second. And we're using a natural experiment, and in in an ideal world, this would have been a really well-designed RCT. And I'll probably spend just 3 minutes, sharing the frustration of trying to get things done in industry, which sometimes works well and other times really doesn't. And we think that aside from showing that communication matters, for us, the most interesting part of the paper has been a dynamic pattern that seems like there's some convergence to, and I'll just use the word equilibrium because that's a word that we typically use. I'm going to be very upfront that I'm not suggesting in any way that they're settling on an equilibrium, but there seems to be some learning going on, and I'll show you exactly in what way that is happening. So let me show you what the eBay best offer bargaining is. This would be a place where I would pause for any questions, but I think it's going to be probably more effective if I at least describe the setup and the data, and then I'll pause for a couple of questions, and then I'll move on with the analysis. So imagine that you're looking for some artwork by Jean-Michel Basquiat, and you see a list of items that appear on eBay. And the first one, you see $45, $475 shipping. The second one is quite pricey, $4,425 free shipping. And then it says, or best offer. The third one, again, it's a fixed price with some shipping costs. So now if you would go ahead and click on this listing, then this is what it's going to look like. So some of you, I'm sure, have interacted on eBay, and this is a familiar page. For those who haven't, notice that, here you see the item, you could scroll through some pictures, and then you have the buy it now, which means that if you would click on this, you would actually commit to purchase it for $4,425. You could add it to a cart and then just keep on shopping and pay for everything later. Or you could click on make an offer. When you click on make an offer, and this is a choice of the seller. I'll say a couple of words about that in a minute. And then if you click on this, I guess I'll show you what happens when you click on it in a second. And now I'll talk about, the seller. So here you see data from 2005 to 2016. This is the percent of sales on eBay that were either auction, and that starts at a little above 80% and goes down in 2016 to about 20%. If I would have to guess, because I haven't seen this data at eBay, it's probably now at a lot closer to 10%. Here you see the fixed price best offer, and this includes the make me an offer. So these are either fixed prices. This is just what we saw here. These are either listings like this that have a fixed price, or listings like this that have a fixed price and make me an offer. And they've basically moved from under 20% to about 80%. Of these, here you see the best offer. So as of 2016, they were just over 10% of total eBay sales and growing. So I expect them to be a little higher now. And, we think this is an interesting price discovery mechanism. Maybe this is also playing a role of a form of price discrimination, so that, if there are some people who are, willing to pay without haggling too much, they might pay the buy it now, and others are going to pay less. And even in the negotiation, maybe the seller is able to act like a car dealer in the United States and try to extract something about willingness to pay. We're going to be agnostic about that, whether it's price discrimination or whether it is some form of price discovery. And we're just going to look at the effect of messaging, as I said. Very quickly, Matt and Tom and I, in this paper in the JP 2019, have used the best offer data for the first time. I'm not going to go through these results. If you're curious, you could look at the paper, but it gave some very rich and interesting ways to look at cheap talk equilibria. And then in a more recent paper in the QJE, the three of us together with Brad Larson, we created a very large data set of bargaining interactions in the US. And we actually made that public, so you could get the data on the NBR website that you see here. And by all means, I invite anyone who's interested to play around with it. A few people have already generated some interesting papers with it. And that paper, it tries to reconcile what we see in the data with historical, well-known theoretical analyses that have been done about bargaining theory. And there are certain parts of the theory that are consistent with the data. And then there are some patterns in the data that really defy not only the theories that exist, but even some things are just really bizarre in the way people behave that suggest there are certain norms. So again, a little bit of advertising for some other work, but more importantly here, for the data set that we hope other people find useful. So going back to that make me an offer, what would happen if you click on make an offer is that a window will pop up, okay? So this is what that window would have looked like in the United States. So you'd have make an offer, your offer. This is where you would put in the amount that you're offering. And then if you see this little plus here, if you would click on it, a window would open up where you could offer a message to the seller. Now, This is what the same thing would look like in Germany. I'm assuming that Pris vorschlagen means make an offer. It's beyond the basic German I know that is from Yiddish that I used to know quite a bit better. And here you would put in your euro. Okay, now here, notice there is no add a message. And historically, what happened was we learned back in around 2013 that these messages, the option to message didn't exist on the Germany site of eBay. And of course, that was a bit surprising. We then tried to figure out why there was no messaging in Germany. Then we were told that it violated some regulations. So this is the 3 minutes I promised you on working within industry. We thought that's a little bizarre. I've had a few people I knew well in the legal office in the headquarters in San Jose. This is when I was still full-time at eBay on leave from Berkeley. And then the head of government relations, regulation, legal, etc., said, no, that's bullshit. There's nothing illegal. It's just that when, historically, eBay DE was some other, company that eBay bought and they built on it. And, when they implemented this, apparently they didn't use the messaging. So then we went back, this is already 2014, and we got approval to move forward. And 6 months passed, nothing is happening. We check up, a year goes by. And by then, half the people who were in the chain of doing this were already gone. So then we get someone new who said, oh, we can't do this because of regulation reasons. So we kind of went through this a couple of times. And then finally, we got approval like, okay, we're doing this. What we wanted to do was to run a clean RCT. Now, this is not that straightforward because if you think about it, and there's a nice paper that Tom Blake wrote with Dominic Coey, I think it's in ACMEC, I think it's published, on running experiments on marketplaces. Because if I'm treating certain people, for example, and they're competing for the same listings, then if some people are treated and some people are in control, you're not really comparing apples and oranges because they're interacting on the same items, and that would have some spillover effects. So what we thought would be the ideal experiment is to take categories that are somewhat distinct, and then some of them offer messaging, others don't offer messaging, then do a diff and diff with that experiment, and that would give us the kind of variation that we need. Unfortunately, that's not how it unraveled. So we started working with these people about how to design the experiment. Then there was some radio silence. This is already, as you could see, 2016. None of us were at eBay at the time. I was already working for Amazon part-time, and Matt was back in Colombia, and he was still part-time connected. And then one day, Matt gets an email saying, oh, we launched this on the Germany website, and which we understood as, oh my God, there's no experiment. There's just a pre-post, which is, it's something, but it's definitely not something that we would have preferred. And it turns out that we had a little bit of luck. So in what way? So May 23rd, 2016 is when communication was enabled, but they only enabled it on the website, which means when you connect to ebay.com through a browser. The mobile app was not updated to include the communication. So this is giving us at least some diff and diff treatment, because it turns out that buyers, and these are the ones who would initiate the offer, many of them are mobile only. Many of them are website only. And of course, there are others who use both of these platforms, both of these devices. So we're going to use a diff and diff strategy in order to distinguish between those who use the website, those who use mobile pre-post, to get the impact of these allowing communication. Other things have happened in Germany at the same time. There were a lot of holidays. As you'll see, we're going to control for those, but no other major site changes. This really was not part of these launches that eBay does usually twice a year, where they make a whole bunch of changes, announce them to everyone. This was a relatively quiet and or a very quiet and very targeted launch. So this would be a good place for me to pause and see if there are any. Okay, so I see Larry had another. So it's about outcomes, even if large amounts of resources are used in the bargaining process. So we're focusing, Larry, on outcomes. And here we're not throwing in really any resources at all, aside from your ability to add some words to a number that you would offer to the counterparty. Curious to know if there are any other questions.
No questions in the chat, at least, but
Okay.
Please, keep them coming or get them coming.
Yes. Okay, great. Okay, so what do messages look like? So this is using Google Translate. Again, what is it? Entschuldige, ich spreche nicht kein Deutsch. This is unfortunately the best price we can offer you. Okay, that's like a response from the seller. Or hello, under it does not go, unfortunately, which I'm sure is a not great translation of what it would be. And of course, Google does not know how to translate MFG, which I think is mit feine Kurs or something like that. I pronounce that? Okay. Okay. So it's like, with best regards. And here's a nice one, hello, dear. And there's the name of the product, interested. What would happen if we met in the middle? There are also figures outside of electric carousel. Is that okay? Friendly greetings, and so on and so forth. Now, we actually are going to dig into textual analysis. And let me just say something that was not really part of the paper at all. We found it interesting, maybe obvious, but when you kind of look at messages that are more likely to end in successful outcomes, those are typically more polite, kinder, nicer messages that use words like please and thank you and so on. I guess it's something that as economists would say, well, why would that matter at all? And, everyone who's non-economist would look at us and say, you people are just freaks of nature. It's kind of, it passes the smell test. Now, in terms of the fraction of messages used when the buyer is mobile only and the buyer is desktop only. So again, we look back historically in the data and create these two samples of buyers, those who are only on the desktop, those who are only on the mobile. And as you could see, we have a little more than twice as many messages when the buyer is desktop only than when the buyer is mobile only. Now, of course, on mobile, there was no release of the messaging. So where are these messages coming from? So now if we only look at fraction with buyer messages, we're getting practically zero on the mobile only. And here are all the action happening on the desktop only. So the difference here is that these are actually interactions where the buyer starts on mobile, there's no message, then the seller responds with a message. So we do have a chunk of sellers who will use the website version and then respond with messages. And apparently then a very small number, almost negligible number of buyers may move to website interaction and respond with a message. But by and large, the buyers who are on mobile are not using messages. A little bit on summary stats, just so you kind of see the orders of magnitude. The typical asking price, right? The average asking price is about $100. This is translated into dollars. The number of interactions, where this is like an interaction in the bargaining. Sorry, I didn't describe the bargaining protocol. Believe it or not, this is almost a Rubinstein game. So the way it works is when I, the buyer, find a listing that has the make an offer, I click on make an offer. That then is going to send an email to the seller that's going to say you have an offer. The seller then needs to open the email. And you know, in the US data, the data that we use for our QJE paper that we made public, you know, it's really interesting. A lot of these sellers don't even open the emails apparently, or if they do, they don't even answer the offer, something to just ignore them. Quite a few, I think it was close to half. You know, it's not that these always generate the communication, but for more professional sellers, if the offers are somewhat reasonable, they will typically have a reply. And a little over 50%, 56% of items sold during our period, which is a few weeks before and a few weeks after the policy change. And we have a little over 2 million listings. Of those listings, we have about 443,000 seller in here. The number of interactions on average per seller, because now we're looking at seller level data, is very high. So sellers are really responding and using this quite a lot. And the number of sales per sellers is 3.2. I'm sure that many of you know this by now, but you know, sites like eBay that used to be 20, 25 years ago, just a bunch of amateurs selling junk on auctions. Now the vast majority of sales are by professional sellers who are using eBay as a portal. At the buyer level data, buyers are known to be a lot more transient. Think of them really as short run players who come, buy something, go away, don't come back for a long time. Again, with the US data at the time, about 30% of buyers that would sign on to eBay, buy something for the first time, about a third of them would never come back and buy anything over a 3-4 year period. So buyers are a lot more, you know, fickle, so to speak. So indeed, per buyer, the number of bargain interactions is only 2. The number of purchases is almost 1. And we have a little over 1.5 million buyers. And here we see the data at the interaction level. So here we see the number of bargaining interactions, which is higher than the number of listings, because some listings actually have more than one bargaining interaction if there's more than one buyer interested. And the number of offers is almost 2 per interaction. So that means a buyer offer and a seller offer, and it could continue up to 3 offers on each side. So, you know, really think of that Rubinstein bargaining. Buyer makes a seller offer, seller accepts or rejects or counters, right? So it's not quite Rubinstein because the seller could just, you know, reject and not counter. But think of that as, you know, a rejection with a counter of I'm sticking to my list price, if you want to think of it conceptually. Then after the seller either rejects or counters, the buyer could accept, reject, or counter, and then the seller could do it again. So it's really this nice sequential bargaining protocol. And so we typically get buyer, seller on average. A little under a half of them end up selling. And we have close to 50-50 buyer on desktop versus buyer on mobile. And we have 50-50 whether the offer is in the post period versus the pre-period for a diff and diff. And of course, this is by design because that's the analysis that we want to engage in. I see, Itai, are the fractions with or without messages in the US similar between the app users and the browser users? In the US, the messaging is allowed both on the app and on the browser. So we don't have any variation in the US, and it's been like that forever. So there's really not much we could leverage that for. Also, it has existed in the US for a very long time. We looked at it. I don't remember off the top of my head, but messages are used in the US a lot more than they were used here during our analysis period, precisely because, this is new. People didn't really know about it. And it's, as you'll see also, the learning process. I see that Yufeng asked, do many listings sell multiple quantities? There are many listings where the seller will have multiple quantities, but they're selling one at a time. I don't remember off the top of my head how many, I'm sure there were some where, a seller is selling, X units of something, but that's much rarer. So, but I don't think we controlled for that in any way. But these are mostly, even the sellers who have multiple units are selling, single units at a time. Okay, so what are the covariates we're going to use as part of our diff and diff? We're going to take a time trend. We're going to control for the ask price, the log of the ask price, to kind of distinguish between more expensive, less expensive items. Category by condition fixed effect. So category, think electronics, music, art, etc. Condition, new versus used. We're going to put day of week fixed effects, some weather controls, whether it's raining in Frankfurt. We'll just use Frankfurt as a reference point, and detrended weather over time. And then finally, we're throwing in holiday fixed effects for the holidays that occur during that time. And typically, the reason we're putting both day of week and holiday fixed effects is because it is well known, and we've seen this many times in past data, that on holidays, people behave differently. Certain days of the week, especially weekend versus weekday, people behave differently. So we're just trying to absorb any of that variation that we know typically happens in e-commerce. Okay, so the identification is going to happen in one of two ways. We're going to do a pre-post estimator only on the desktop. So basically, take all the data pre-post, look at the expected, this is basically the likelihood of success when we are post, when desktop is 1, and then minus the likelihood of success when we are pre, P equals 0 because P is post, and desktop equals 1, right? So here we're just using the desktop data. And then alternatively, we're going to have our diff and diff estimator where we're doing, X is our covariates, P is post, D is desktop. So we're basically desktop post minus pre, mobile post minus pre, and take the difference between them. That is our simple diff and diff estimator. Let me show you the pre-post, pictures first to see that there's something there in the pictures. So here we're looking at the raw data. This is the success rate on any given day. And here are the residuals after controlling for all those covariates. And we do see a, at least visual difference. You'll see the regressions in a second on the desktop. Here's the pre-post mobile. We're really not seeing anything. So it looks like we're going to have a decent diff and diff. And just in terms of the results, before we go into them, there's something important to note about power. So if you recall, we had about 3 million bargaining interactions, about 2 million listings in our data. And usually when you think about those sizes, you don't think you should worry at all about power. It turns out, there's also in work that I did with Tom Blake, who's on this paper, and Chris Nosko with advertising. And there's a really important paper that Randall Lewis and Justin Rao published in QJE in 2015. In a lot of these e-commerce analyses, the day-to-day variation that's happening creates so much noise that when you're trying to detect a lift, a signal that is economically meaningful, even though it might only be a 0.5% or 1% point, we're talking about billions of dollars here. It's very difficult to pick up those signals in the noise. So if you take our binomial success rate from the kind of baseline data of a little over 40%, and if you think, what about a 0.5% increase in the likelihood of a sale happening? If you want to have, confidence of 5% and power of 0.5%, you need 3.4 million experiments, right? So you really do need very large experimentation. And what we're seeing here, we have about a 6% adoption rate. Because, I mean, this is what, you look at the use of, this is here, you could see this, right? This is fraction with any messages. So, this is our 6% of all listings are using messages. So, we have an intent to treat that's very nice, but the actual number of treated is relatively small. So that means that, the effects, even if they're large, they're going to be very, very small on the marketplace. So that's just to take that consideration into effect. Again, I mentioned those who actually engaged versus those who didn't. So the estimators that we have are giving us an intent to treat, taking the whole population. And these are all the interactions post May 23rd with a desktop buyer. We also want to know the treatment effect on the treated. So here we're defining a complier as an interaction after May 23rd with a desktop buyer that included a message. And then we're going to estimate the treatment on the treated with a standard IV where we're going to use a dummy for being a complier. I'm just going to jump into the results now. Let me move my chat thing away here so I see the whole table. The pre-post, we could look at desktop, mobile. Here you see the raw results in 1.2 is the desktop with and without and with controls. And then you see the mobile without and with controls. Without controls, you get some effect on the pre-post. Once you throw in a whole bunch of our controls, that pretty much gets killed. Now, if you're looking at the difference in difference, there we're actually able to, maintain that result that we have about a 0.4 increase probability increase, 0.4% increase in the likelihood of sales with and without controls in our diff and diff. And when we're doing the IV, so the treatment on the treated, then we get about a 7.5% increase in the likelihood of success. Remember, the base was about 43%. So we're getting close to a 20% increase in the likelihood of a sale, which is quite significant economically and statistically, as you could see here. So now in the 6 minutes I have left, I want to jump to the part that we think is the most interesting. Now, it's interesting that communication increases success. And again, I apologize to not deliver on Imke's introduction of liking the use of theory and empirics, because we really don't have a good theory of why is communication impacting success. Again, I think this is where if you stopped 100 random people on the street, they would all say, well, of course, we're creating some rapport, we're creating some camaraderie, we're able to trust each other more. I'm sure that, people are going to have stories like that. But what we found interesting and worth exploring with our data is this pattern over here. So here you see the estimated effect on the success rate. These are the 3 weeks before the launch. Here we see 4 weeks after the launch. And the pattern that we see is quite clear. We have a very stable 0 happening before, and then we have this gradual increase that becomes significant in week 3 and remains significant in week 4. Actually, not to stop here and say, well, look how amazing this is. Here's the 10 weeks post on the bottom. You see that after week 4, it actually drops down a bit to a little below 0.5%, and then it goes up again. And if you just do the pre-post, as we saw, we have this significance, but it's not, this very nice and constant increase. But we do see a pickup. So if you kind of take the 0 here, it kind of grows, and the continuation is somewhere around the 0.5% on average. And again, if we would look at the effect on the treated, the problem is that we don't have a lot of repeat buyers. So it's a little hard to kind of conclude what would happen to people who would use this on the buy side more frequently. But it turns out that on sellers, we could actually learn something interesting. So let me tell you what we've done in terms of the textual analysis. The question is, could we see some kind of convergence to quote unquote an equilibrium, right? I'm very agnostic about that, but let's just use that terminology. So we've done a text analysis of close to 250 million messages that were sent in the 10 weeks following the launch of messaging. We do cleaning, language detection, blah, blah, blah. And then we're going to run these cosine similarity, I'll explain exactly in what way, approach to see whether the patterns in the messages are suggestive of some kind of learning, okay? Everything here is descriptive. We're not arguing that anything is causal. And we're basically taking a bag of words approach, which is one of the bread and butter off-the-shelf natural language processing models. So we're doing it separately for buyers and sellers. We're going to take all the text that we're processing, and for every week, we're going to create a vector in this multi-dimensional space that describes language for each week's, and we're going to see how close these vectors are across different weeks. So if 2 weeks would use the exact same messages, and then we would have complete cosine similarity. And if they were using language that is completely uncorrelated, we're going to have complete randomness between the weeks. Let me jump to the yes. This is what I want to show you here about that. So here is a heat map of the buyers, and here is a heat map of the sellers. And remember, this is the success rates. So what are we seeing here? When the cosine similarity is 0, right, that means that the language, the vectors of the language are identical. Now, of course, comparing week 1 to week 1 and week 2 to week 2, we're getting identical. But then as we move up here in the colors to lighter and lighter and lighter, this means that the messages are not similar at all, or a lot less similar. When you look at the buyers, you don't see any pattern here. So basically, week 1, right, week 4 and week 1 are pretty much as similar as week 3 and week 1 and week 2 and week 1 and week 6 and week 1 and week 8 and week 1. But when you look at the sellers, we see a very different pattern, right? So week 1 is more similar to week 2 than it is to week 3s and 4, 5 and 6 even less, 7 and 8 even less, 9 and 10, it's almost white. And you see that as you're moving towards the diagonal, everything gets darker and darker, which is basically telling us that when we're looking at any given week for seller messages, the language used near that week is more similar than language used away from that week in any direction you go. Now, this suggests that sellers seem to be converging with the language that they're using. Here's another way to see this. Very quickly to try to describe this is, if I'm using a 1 week difference, that's delta 1. So week 2 and 1 are a lot more different than week 3 and 2 or 4 and 3. Here's a slight increase. It kind of gets flat. This delta 5, for example, is week 6 and 1. We're looking at a 5-week delta, are more different than week 7 and 2. They're more different than week 8 and 3. And delta 8 is week 9 and 1 is more different than week 10 and 2, right? So these are different ways. So when you look at buyers, it's just like a jumble of noise. And when you look at sellers, you see this consistent, things are becoming more similar. So what that suggested to us, and I know I'm a minute past, so I'll take another 2 minutes and I'll wrap up, is that sellers, who are these long run players, they seem to be learning how to communicate, right? We're agnostic about what exactly are they learning. Are they learning to say thank you? Maybe. Are they learning to reveal certain things? Maybe. But there seems to be some revelation. And this led us to run this regression, which we were quite excited about the result here. So here's what we've done. We're saying, okay, if they are indeed learning, it means that week 10, right, should be the week where a lot more learning has happened. And here they're using, the right language. So now let's take any message sent in the whole 10-week period and see how similar it is to the corpus of language used in week 10, and look at whether that could predict the success rate. And indeed, it does. It kind of increases, it's a little hard to interpret this, but it basically says, if you at any point have used a message that is more similar to the kind of messages used in week 10, you are more likely to succeed as a seller in the outcome of this negotiation. Controlling for message length, we're still getting a positive, significant result. And here, when we throw in seller fixed effects, that's when we actually are losing the significance. The order of magnitude doesn't change that much, but we're obviously losing a lot of power here. This could also suggest that some sellers are just a little better at this than others. But I think there is some nice evidence of this convergence. So very quickly wrapping up, does communication facilitate successful bargaining? On the theory side, there's really not much to build on. And we find that, yes, there seems to be a pretty nice increase, about 7 to 8 percentage points on a base of about 44%. And it does look like they are learning how to communicate. Future work, diving more into this, textual analysis, and understanding better which mechanisms might facilitate better communication, what's behind the reason that communication matters. And again, more broadly, we think these are new, interesting sources of data to educate ourselves. And with that, I will stop. And I see, okay, Alexander, did you check whether there's any self-selection happening? I could imagine that people who are more keen on purchasing an item choose to use the desktop version in order to be able to communicate. Interesting question. The thing is that because there was no announcement here, and because historically these buyers, either use the mobile or the desktop, then when they're on mobile, they're just not going to know that they have the option to bargain. So we would worry if we would see some dramatic differences in behavior pre-post, that we have a whole bunch of buyers switching over to desktop, but we didn't observe that in the data. So I think we're not that concerned about that issue. Yufeng asked, do you see evolution prices? Do sellers adapt both in words and their counter offers? So this is just the effective price. We did not, I'm trying to remember if we actually looked at whether they increased prices. I don't recall that we did, and that's a good question. And so I'll just make a note to myself to verify that. Thank you, Yufeng.
Sorry. Larry White also wanted to ask a question, if that's okay. Oh, and I'll.
I see another question in the chat.
All right.
Tommaso,
all right. Steve,
go ahead, Larry.
first, nice stuff. I like it a lot. This is the journal editor in me coming out. Sorry. Are these, logit or probit regressions that you're running? I don't think I heard either of those words. It'd be nice to know, is it, or if you're using, simple OLS, probability equal, why are you doing that? So that would be the first thing. And then the second, back to this efficiency issue. I would stay away from the word efficiency because, geez, we've got a set of ideas in our heads about inputs and outputs, and you're improving outcomes for sure. And I would focus on the improving outcomes, increasing the completion rates, whatever. Stay away from efficiency. In your context, of course, it is efficient because there's very little input and improved outcomes, sure. But as a general, I spent the first 5-8 minutes just thinking, efficiency, inputs, what's going on here? He's only talking about outputs. Stay away from efficiency.
Yeah, no, well, I'm pausing because I completely understand where you're coming from with the efficiency, right? And could I prove that these additional successes are efficient?
I believe that in your context. I believe
yes.
that because you've got very little variation in inputs.
Right.
For sure. No. It just, as a general matter, you're telling us about efficiency in bargaining. No, you're really telling us about improving outcomes. And I just offer that. But the other thing is, tell us about, what kinds of regressions you're running.
You're right. So I believe that everything that I reported was done in, I think it was OLS, just simple probability. But we played with everything. So this is embarrassing. I should go back and see, or maybe we ended up putting the logits. I actually don't remember what's in the final version. So probably in 3 minutes I could go back.
No, it isn't worth it. No, let us know. And if you're not doing logit probit, tell us why you think linear probability is.
We sliced and diced this in any possible way, and the results were robust. So I don't remember what we ended up choosing at the end, like I said, but I could very quickly.
Again,
no, I know it's not
worth your
first
time. Yeah.
Okay, I'm keeping track of people who asked questions. Steve, if you're getting lost among the chat messages.
Let me get the chat. Hold on, I lost it a second ago. Okay. Hans asks, there may be questions.
There's Tommaso Alba actually asked a question.
Yes, so right, Tomas, I found it. So with respect to the last result, is it possible that communication spurred changes in prices, items, descriptions, shipping solutions instead of improved communication? I'm a seller. I receive repeated questions from buyers. I change my offer, and as a result, I sell more. So in the period that we have, there was no, or at least no statistically detectable changes in the offers. The listings were stable. Could this result in, I would put this under the idea of cheap talk that is not fully cheap. What do I mean by that? If you're a seller and you list something at 100, and 100 is too much because here are 7 websites where the same item is selling for 80. I could write you just saying, hey, look at these websites, you're overcharging. And then, it's not really cheap talk. It's real information that would create an update. We don't see that in the interactions that we have. I can't rule out that, as part of a more, I'll say, outcome-oriented, not using the word efficiency, exercise, that sellers would be able to use this information in a positive way. But this is not happening in the data that we have. Mikhail asked, could it be the fact that losing significance in the last table attributed to the measurement of similarity? For example, some new techniques could measure similarity more precisely, resulting in less noise. So I don't know why the seller fixed effects would be the reason that it would kind of mess up our cosine similarity. I'm not familiar with BERT. I'm going to take a note of that to see if there's something we could look at. So definitely worth considering, but I just don't see why the fixed effects would create that problem, because then if sellers are heterogeneous in their ability to use language, that would help explain it. But again, the point estimate remains in the same order of magnitude. So there's also the power issue of throwing in a whole bunch of variables. Hans asks, are there many repeat interactions? Can sellers build loyalty or reputation? On eBay, that happens very infrequently. So if we would want to try to do, actually with the US data set that was humongous, there we had 22 million threads, 80 million listings. There was nothing we could tease out with the repeat interactions because the order of magnitude was just negligible. Felix asks, how do you reconcile the peak in week 4 and subsequent decline? Your guess is as good as mine. Noise, randomness, I just do not have a good story. Is the idea that sellers become better and better at reaching the success outcome without negotiation? Possibly, right? That would have to tie into the point that Tommaso raised, right? If sellers from communication in the first 4 weeks are learning things about how to be a better seller, then they might be learning how to do it without the communication. I'm not sure our data is going to be rich enough to tease that out. So I unfortunately don't have a good answer for that, Felix. Thanks, Larry, for joining. I see you got to run. Hans, maybe people started to use mobile and desktop more after learning that messages were possible via desktop. That actually is something we could directly look at. So I don't think we did that analysis, but I think that's interesting to look at.
Taking advantage of being the moderator. I mean, it also might be something that, with the comment that Yufeng made about prices, maybe prices change concurrently with this success probability or something. But also I see that we're pretty much just on time here, and no open questions right now. So this might be a good time to just thank everybody, and thank you, Steve, for coming. Right?
Thank you very much.
Interesting work. And also a little note, I think, about the next speaker that we'll have in 2 weeks. There'll be Hong Luo from Harvard Business School, and she'll be talking about gender orientation and segregation of ideas. based on the Me Too impact on in Hollywood. So thank you, everybody.